The town barely showed up on maps anymore. A scatter of wooden buildings clinging to a stretch of red dirt road, pressed flat by wind and time. Folks passed through when they had to, stayed only if they had nowhere else to go. At the far end of that road, where the ground dipped and the fences thinned out, stood an old blacksmith's forge, Logan's forge. It squatted low against the land, stone walls darkened by years of smoke, a warped wooden door hanging on tired hinges. By day, the ring of hammer on anvil was the loudest sound for miles. By night, the place belonged to silence and stars. Logan lived alone behind the forge, in a narrow room that smelled of iron, ash, and oil. He was a man shaped by heat and repetition. Fire, hammer, metal. Those were the only conversations he needed. Words failed people. Steel didn't. Steel bent or broke, and you learned from that. He rose before dawn, fed the fire, worked until his arms burned, then worked a little longer. Horseshoes, plow blades, hinges, nails. Nothing fancy. Just what kept the town breathing. When the forge cooled at night, he cooled with it, sitting in the quiet like a man who had made peace with being unseen. That night, the first storm of the season came early and angry. The wind howled down the road, kicking up red dust before rain slapped it flat. Thunder rolled low, deep in the earth, not sharp but heavy like a warning. Logan had just quenched the last piece of glowing iron, steam hissing as it died. He shoveled ash over the coals and closed the firebox. The forge went dark, save for the dull glow of embers fading to black. He was wiping his hands on a rag when he sensed movement, something that didn't belong to the storm. At the edge of where the forge light had been, just beyond the reach of the door's shadow, a figure stood. A woman. She didn't rush forward, didn't knock, didn't call out. She stood still in the rain, shoulders squared, feet planted in the mud as if the ground itself mattered. Her hair, long and dark, was soaked and clung to her face and neck. Her clothes were heavy with water. She looked exhausted, bone-deep exhausted. But her eyes were sharp, alert, watching every shift of Logan's weight. Apache. Logan knew it the way you knew weather before it broke. Not from clothes or skin alone, but from the way she held herself. Upright, guarded, like someone who had learned the cost of stepping where she wasn't invited. Rain ran down the brim of the forge roof, dripping between them. The wind pushed at her back, but she didn't move. She spoke first, her voice low, steady despite the storm. "I need shelter, just for the night." No apology, no pleading, no story meant to soften him. Logan said nothing. He studied her the way he studied cracked steel, looking for the fault line, the place where pressure had already done its damage. She was shaking, but she wasn't weak. There was a difference, and he knew it. Men in town would have slammed the door, some out of fear, some out of hatred dressed up as caution. Logan felt both rise in him, sharp and instinctive. A stranger, Apache, night storm, trouble waiting to happen. This forge was all he had. His rules were simple because they had to be. Let no one in, owe nothing. Keep the fire alive and your head down. The woman did not step closer. "I won't come in unless you say so," she added. That did something to him. Logan glanced back at the dark forge, at the anvil still warm beneath his palm, at the door that had kept the world out for years. Then he looked at the woman again, rain-soaked, silent, waiting. The storm cracked overhead, thunder splitting the sky wide open. He exhaled slowly, the way he did before striking a stubborn piece of iron. "Come out of the rain," he said. He stepped aside and pulled the door open. The woman hesitated, just a breath. Then she crossed the threshold. Water pooled on the stone floor. The door closed behind her with a solid, final sound that echoed louder than the thunder outside. The forge felt smaller, warmer, changed. Logan didn't know her name, didn't know where she'd come from or what she was running from. He only knew that the rules he'd lived by had bent, just a little, and he had no idea that from that moment on, the forge at the end of the road would no longer shape iron alone. The storm broke sometime before dawn. Logan woke to a quiet he wasn't used to, a silence that felt heavier than the rain had been. The forge lay still outside, the air washed clean, the red dirt packed dark and firm. For a moment he wondered if the night before had been nothing more than a trick of exhaustion and weather. Then he noticed the bucket by the door. It was full. Logan hadn't filled it. He knew that much. He stepped outside, boots crunching softly on wet gravel, and stopped short. The forge was ready, not fired, but prepared. The ash from last night had been cleared away, gathered neatly in the pit. Tools that had been left where he dropped them were laid out with care. Handles aligned, metal facing inward as if someone understood the order of the place. He stood there longer than he meant to, hands resting on his hips, scanning the space for signs of disturbance. There were none. Inside, the woman was awake. She sat on the edge of the small bench near the wall. Her wet clothes from the night before hung carefully near the hearth, not touching the stone, not too close to the coals. She didn't look up when Logan entered, didn't rush to speak, didn't ask for food or water or permission to be there another hour. She simply nodded once. Logan nodded back. That was the extent of it. She stayed, but not the way drifters stayed. She didn't hover, didn't ask questions, didn't wander into spaces that weren't hers. When Logan worked, she stayed clear of the forge, watching from a distance with a stillness that felt deliberate. He noticed the way she moved. She never stepped across the anvil, never crossed the space between hammer and fire. When iron glowed, she waited. When Logan reached for a tool, she gave him room. Not fear, awareness, respect. That alone told him more than any explanation could have. By midday, she brought water again. Not offered, not announced, just placed where it belonged. When Logan paused to drink, she turned her gaze away, as if even gratitude was something private. That evening, as the sun bled out behind the low hills, Logan let the forge go dark again. The woman sat near the fire pit, close enough to the warmth but never crowding it. From a small cloth pouch, she drew out beads, earth-toned, worn smooth by time, and began threading them slowly. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, not hurried, not careless. She whispered as she worked. Not to him, not to the room. The words were soft, rhythmic, carried on breath more than sound. Logan didn't understand the language, but he understood the tone. It wasn't prayer exactly. It was remembrance. The fire popped quietly. Logan pretended to focus on sharpening a blade, but his attention kept drifting back to her, to the way she sat upright even in rest, to the way her eyes lifted at every creak of the building, measuring the world before trusting it. She wasn't starving. She didn't ask for a bite of the bread he set aside, only accepted it when he pushed the plate closer. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if mindful of each mouthful. No one who had been living hand-to-mouth behaved that way. Logan had seen plenty of wanderers in his time. Men broken by drink, women worn thin by desperation, folks who took and took because they had nothing left to lose. This woman was different. She carried herself like someone who had once belonged to something structured, something demanding, a life where rules mattered, where discipline wasn't imposed, it was inherited. A tribe, he thought. Not the word townsfolk spat when they were afraid. The real thing. The unseen framework that taught a person where to stand, when to speak, and when to hold their ground in silence. That night, Logan lay awake longer than usual, listening to the forge settle, to the wind brushing against the walls. The woman slept near the fire, wrapped in a blanket he'd left without comment. He realized something then. She wasn't acting grateful. She was acting careful. Careful not to offend, careful not to claim, careful not to leave a mark where she wasn't sure she'd be allowed to remain. And that unsettled him more than any demand would have. Logan stared at the ceiling, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He had opened his door to a stranger, thinking it would be a single night, a simple kindness in a hard world. But nothing about her was simple. As sleep finally pulled him under, one question lingered, heavy and unanswered. What had a woman like that endured to be walking alone at the edge of the world? Days passed without being counted, not because time had stopped, but because it no longer pressed down on Logan the way it used to. The forge still rang with the strike of hammer against iron, but the sound no longer echoed back at him empty. There were other rhythms now, soft ones, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. The scent of dried herbs lingered in the air, faint but steady, woven through the familiar smells of coal and hot steel. Somewhere between heats, Logan noticed it and paused, frowning slightly, unsure when it had arrived. It didn't belong to the forge, yet it didn't feel out of place. Footsteps moved lightly across the stone floor. Not the heavy shuffle of men who came to demand repairs and leave dust behind. These steps knew where to fall, knew where not to. The fire burned more evenly. Logan couldn't have said why. He tended it the same as always, fed it the same fuel, watched the same signs. And yet the flames held steady, neither flaring wild nor dying thin. It was as if the forge itself had settled into a calmer breath. The woman worked beside him now, not in the way apprentices did, eager and clumsy, asking too many questions. She stayed just outside the circle of heat, offering help only when it was needed. When he ground the edge of a plow blade, she turned the wheel with a steady hand. When the dust coated his skin, she poured water over his hands without a word, scrubbing the iron grit away until his palms were clean again. Logan didn't tell her to stop. He didn't tell her to continue either. It simply became the way things were done. One afternoon, he noticed her watching him repair a cracked handle on a tool. Her gaze lingered on a knife tucked into the strap at his waist. Old, nicked, the kind of blade that had seen too many seasons and not enough care. Without saying anything, Logan took it out that evening and set to work. He cleaned the steel, rebalanced the weight, smoothed the grip until it fit a smaller hand. He didn't ask why she carried it, or where she'd learned to keep it close. When he set it down near her bedroll, she looked at him for a long moment. Then she inclined her head just slightly. That was thanks enough. Late one morning, when the sun hung high and the air shimmered with heat, a child came to the forge. A boy no older than 8, boots too big, cheeks flushed from walking fast. He led a small horse by the reins, the animal favoring one hoof. Logan crouched to inspect it, already reaching for tools. The woman stepped forward before he could speak, moving with a gentleness that made the horse settle. She knelt beside the boy and showed him how to hold the reins, how to stand where the animal could see him without feeling trapped. Here, she said softly, guiding his hands. Slow. The boy nodded, eyes wide, doing exactly as she showed him. Logan worked while she stayed close, murmuring calm words that carried no urgency, only assurance. When it was done, the boy grinned, pride swelling in his chest as if he'd helped more than he had. He thanked Logan, then glanced at the woman. She smiled at him, not broad, not bright, but warm enough to stay with him long after he'd gone. Logan watched them both disappear down the road, something tightening and loosening in his chest all at once. That evening, the forge glowed as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the yard. Logan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, listening to the quiet. It wasn't silence anymore. It was presence. He realized then that the forge hadn't grown weaker with her in it. It hadn't lost its edge or its purpose. If anything, it felt steadier, like a fire tended not just with skill, but with care. For the first time in years, Logan understood something he hadn't known how to name before. A place didn't lose its strength by letting someone in. Sometimes it finally learned how to live. It happened without warning, the way most true breaks do. The afternoon had settled into a dull, steady heat. Logan was repairing a loose strap near the workbench, his attention fixed on the leather and iron in his hands. The woman was nearby, kneeling as she sorted a small pouch she carried with her everywhere. It was worn thin from use, the stitching darkened by age and weather. When Logan reached for a fallen tool, his hand brushed against the pouch. Something inside shifted. The reaction was instant. Her breath hitched sharply, a sound torn loose from her chest. She lunged forward and grabbed his wrist, her grip fierce, fingers digging in with a strength that startled him. Don't! The word came out harsh, broken, nothing like the quiet tone she had carried until now. Logan froze. He didn't pull away, didn't argue. He simply let his hand fall open and stepped back. She clutched the pouch to her chest, shoulders shaking, eyes wide and dark with something close to fear or rage. For a heartbeat, the forge felt like it had gone cold. I didn't mean, Logan began. Her voice cut him off. You must not touch that. The words trembled, but the meaning behind them did not. Silence settled hard between them. The fire crackled once, sharp and loud in the stillness. Logan nodded slowly, backing away another step, giving her space the way one does around a wounded animal. I won't, he said quietly. She stood there for a long moment, breathing through clenched teeth, as if fighting something rising from deep inside her. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the tension drained from her body. She sank down onto the bench, her grip loosening. Her eyes dropped to the pouch in her hands. It's not for you, she said, not accusing now, exhausted. It's not for anyone. Logan stayed where he was. He didn't sit, didn't hover. He waited. After a while, she spoke again. That stone, she said softly, fingers brushing the shape beneath the cloth, was given to me when I was a child. It marked me as chosen. Logan frowned slightly, unsure what that meant. In my people, she continued, being chosen does not always mean being protected. Her voice remained steady, but something in her posture had folded inward, like a door closing against the wind. She told him then, slowly, without drama, about elders who decided fate, about a role assigned before she was old enough to refuse, about being offered not as a daughter or a woman, but as a solution, a way to restore balance, to appease what others feared. I was meant to be given, she said, not asked. Logan felt the words settle heavy in his chest. They said it was honor, she went on, that it would bring peace, that my life belonged to the people. She let out a bitter breath. But my body still knew it wanted to live. The decision to leave had come at a cost. To walk away meant breaking ties that could never be mended. It meant being hunted, not always with weapons, but with shame and silence. It meant carrying the weight of betrayal, even when survival was the only crime. I ran, she said, because staying would have taken everything from me, even my name. Logan said nothing. There were no words shaped well enough for what she had laid bare. She lifted her eyes to him then, searching his face. Not for judgment, but for understanding. They taught you to fear us, she said quietly. But this, she pressed the pouch to her chest. This is what I feared. The forge felt different now, smaller, closer. Logan looked at the fire, at the anvil, at the space between them where he had always believed rules could keep things simple. He understood finally that she hadn't come to him seeking shelter from white men, from towns, from the world beyond the hills. She had come because the place she called home had turned against her. That night, as the fire dimmed and the forge settled into shadow, Logan lay awake, staring into the dark. The truth weighed on him, not as a burden, but as a reckoning. She wasn't running from the world he knew. She was running from the one that had first claimed her. And that, Logan realized, made everything different. The whispers didn't arrive all at once. They slipped in the way dust does, quiet, patient, settling into corners before anyone noticed. Logan sensed it first in the pauses. Men who used to lean against the forge door now lingered farther off. Voices dropped when he stepped close. Eyes lingered a moment too long, then turned away. By the end of the week, the forge stood quiet longer than it should have. No one said anything outright, not at first, but the glances carried meaning, and meaning traveled fast in a place this small. Someone had seen her by the fire. Someone else had watched her draw water. It didn't take much for a story to shape itself. The blacksmith's hiding in Apache. Logan heard it secondhand, carried by the wind of a half-finished sentence. He didn't ask who said it. He didn't need to. The words had already taken on a life of their own. Fewer horses came by. Fewer tools were left for repair. A man who'd owed Logan work for months crossed the street rather than meet his eyes. Even the boy with the small horse didn't return. The forge hadn't changed. The town had. Logan worked through it, hammer rising and falling with the same steady rhythm, though his thoughts wandered. He had built his life around simple rules. Do honest work, keep your head down, don't borrow trouble. Those rules had kept him fed, if not fulfilled. Now they pressed against each other, sharp and unforgiving. He could ask her to leave. The thought came uninvited, unwelcome. But it came. He imagined the quiet returning, the steady trickle of work, the way things had been before the storm. Safe, predictable, empty. Or he could keep the door open. That choice came with consequences he could already feel tightening around him. Fewer jobs, harder winters, a forge that might go cold for good. Logan had always believed that right and wrong were clear, solid things, like iron. You tested them under heat, and they revealed themselves. But this wasn't iron. It was people. One evening, as the sky dimmed and the town settled into its uneasy hush, Logan found the woman inside the forge, kneeling beside her bedroll. Her small bundle lay open, folded with care. The pouch, the beads, the knife he'd repaired. She moved quietly, efficiently. Leaving, he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, saying nothing at first. Watching the way she paused before touching each item, as if committing the space to memory. The fire was low, casting long shadows across the floor. They're talking, she said at last without looking up. Logan nodded. Never shadows groom. They always do. She tied the bundle closed, hands steady despite the tremor in her breath. I didn't mean for this to happen. You didn't, he said. She rose to her feet, eyes finally meeting his. There was no fear in them now, only resolve, the kind forged by long roads and harder choices. I won't bring trouble to your door, she said. I know when it's time to move. Logan felt something twist inside him, something old and stubborn. He pushed off the frame and took a step forward. This place, he said slowly, choosing his words the way he chose steel, has seen worse than talk. She didn't answer. He stepped closer. No one owns you here, he continued. No one trades you. No one decides your worth. Her jaw tightened. If you stay, he said, it's because you choose to. And if you go, that's your choice too. The fire popped softly between them. I won't tell you what to do, Logan said, but I won't push you out to make things easy for myself. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. She searched his face as if looking for the crack, the place where fear might still be hiding. What she found instead made her shoulders sag, just slightly. You would risk this, she said, for me. Logan shrugged, a rough, unpolished gesture. I'd risk it for what's right. She looked down at the bundle in her hands. Then slowly, she set it back where it had been. Outside, the town remained unchanged. The whispers still clung to the walls, the roads, the air itself. But inside the forge, something shifted. Logan didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how long the fire would hold, or whether the town would ever look at him the same way again. What he knew, what he felt settle into his bones with quiet certainty, was that for the first time in years, he had chosen risk over comfort. They arrived just after dawn. Logan heard them before he saw them. The low rhythm of hooves moving slow and deliberate, not the careless pace of travelers passing through. This was a measured approach, intentional. He stepped out of the forge, the morning air cool against his skin, and watched as three figures emerged from the pale dust at the edge of the road. Apache. They rode without hurry, faces set, eyes fixed on the forge as if it had been marked long before this moment. Their horses stopped several yards away. No greeting was offered. No weapon was drawn. The quiet between them stretched tight, like iron pulled too far without heat. The woman stood behind Logan, close enough that he could feel her breath change. She knew them. One of the men dismounted. He was older than the others, his hair threaded with gray, his posture straight despite the years etched into his face. His gaze passed over Logan without interest, then settled on the woman. You have run far, he said in their language. She didn't answer. The people have waited, he continued. Your leaving broke balance. Logan stepped forward, placing himself squarely in the forge doorway. This is my land, he said, his voice calm, unraised. Say what you need to say from there. The man's eyes flicked to him at last, sharp and assessing. She does not belong to you. Logan nodded once. That much is true. A faint stir ran through the riders. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation. She belongs to the people, the man said. She was chosen. She chose otherwise, and Logan replied. The air tightened. The man studied Logan more carefully now, took in the soot on his clothes, the scarred hands, the way he stood with no weapon in sight. No challenge in his stance, only refusal. Our law is older than yours, and the man said. So is the ground beneath your feet, Logan answered. And here, it's mine. The words settled heavy between them. The woman stepped forward then, moving to stand between the riders and the forge. Her shoulders were squared, her chin lifted. She spoke quietly, but her voice carried. I will not return. The man's jaw tightened. If you do not, he said, the people will close their hands to you forever. She met his gaze without flinching. They already did. Silence followed. Not the empty kind, the kind filled with memory and consequence. Logan watched her closely. He could feel the pull on her, the weight of blood and history tugging her back toward a place that had shaped her, even as it had tried to break her. He knew that pull. Everyone who stayed in a place long enough did. The man dismounted fully now and stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into the dirt. There are ways to restore order, he said, ways that do not leave loose ends. Logan felt the meaning behind the words settle cold in his gut. He did not move. This forge, he said slowly, is where broken things are made useful again. Tools, lives, sometimes both. The man frowned. I will not trade her, Logan went on. I will not hand her over, and I will not step aside so you can take what does not wish to be taken. One of the younger riders shifted in his saddle, fingers brushing the grip of a knife. Logan didn't look at him. There is a line here, Logan said. Cross it with force and you bring shame, not justice. The older man's eyes narrowed. He weighed the moment carefully, the way a leader does when every outcome carries cost. At last, he turned his gaze back to the woman. "You choose this?" he asked. "A life among strangers? Among iron and dust?" She answered without hesitation. "I choose to live." The words cut clean. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the man inclined his head, just enough to be seen. "The people will remember," he said. "So will we." He mounted his horse. The others followed, turning away without another glance. The dust rose again as they left, swallowing their shapes until the road lay empty once more. Logan exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders. The woman stood still, hands clenched at her sides. When she finally turned to him, her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something steadier. The forge door stood open behind him. No blood had been spilled, no threats carried through, and yet something irrevocable had taken place. The forge had become more than shelter. It had become a boundary. A line drawn not with weapons but with choice. And no one, Logan knew, had crossed it by force. They came at first light, when the forge was still cool and the day had not yet chosen its temper. Logan heard them before he saw them. Hoofbeats measured and deliberate, not the careless rush of men passing through. He stepped out into the pale morning and watched as 4 riders emerged from the thinning mist, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. They stopped short of the yard, far enough to show restraint, close enough to make their purpose clear. Apache. The woman stood just inside the forge, her body still as stone. Logan didn't look back, but he felt her there. Felt the tension gather, like heat building before a strike. One rider dismounted. He was older, his face weathered, his posture carrying the quiet authority of someone long obeyed. He did not greet Logan. His eyes went past him, fixed on the woman. "You have broken from the people," the man said, his voice even, stripped of ceremony. "That cannot remain undone." Logan stepped forward, placing himself in the open doorway. The forge behind him yawned dark and deep, the anvil resting silent at its heart. "This is where you stop," Logan said. The man's gaze shifted to him at last, slow and assessing. "She is not yours to guard." "She isn't anyone's to take," Logan replied. A murmur passed through the remaining riders, low, restrained, edged with warning. "She was chosen," the elder said. "Order demands return, or an ending." The words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. Logan felt them settle like a weight on the ground between them. He didn't reach for anything. No hammer, no blade. His hands stayed open at his sides, scarred palms visible, empty. "This land," Logan said, "answers to no council but the one who works it. And on this ground, no one is given, traded, or silenced." The man took a step closer. The air tightened. "You speak as if honor belongs only to you." Logan shook his head once. "Honor belongs to those who leave room for choice." Behind him, the woman moved. She stepped forward past the threshold until she stood between Logan and the riders. The morning light caught in her hair, in the beads at her wrist. She looked smaller than she had before, but straighter, steadier. "I will not return," she said. The elder's jaw tightened. "You walk away from blood." "I walk toward breath," she answered. "Toward a life that is mine." One of the younger riders shifted, hand brushing the handle of a knife. Logan did not turn. "No one crosses this door with force," Logan said calmly. "Not for balance, not for tradition, not today." The elder studied him in silence. He took in the forge, the soot-darkened stone, the tools worn smooth by years of honest use, the quiet that settled there not as fear, but as resolve. "This man offers you iron and dust," the elder said to the woman. "Hard days, no songs of your people, no return." She met his gaze without lowering her own. "He offers me choice." The word hung there heavy and undeniable. For a long moment, no one moved. The horses stamped softly, sensing the tension. The forge creaked as the morning warmed its bones. At last, the elder inclined his head, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. "The people will remember," he said. "So will the land." He mounted his horse. The others followed, turning away as one, their figures retreating back into the dust they had risen from. When they were gone, the yard lay still again. Logan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The woman stood beside him now, her shoulders trembling. Not with fear, but with the release of something long carried. The forge door remained open behind them. Nothing had been struck. No blood spilled. No threats made good. And yet a line had been drawn, not in the dirt, not with steel, but with will. From that morning on, the forge was no longer just a place where iron was shaped. It had become a boundary, one no hand could cross by force and no voice could erase with tradition alone. The riders disappeared into the distance, but what they left behind did not. The threat wasn't spoken aloud again. It didn't need to be. It lingered in the way the air felt heavier after they were gone, in the way the road stayed empty longer than usual, in the way the land itself seemed to hold its breath. Logan felt it every morning when he stepped outside and scanned the horizon before lighting the forge. Nothing came, and yet everything had changed. Word traveled faster than winter. By the end of the week, the forge stood quiet more often than not. Men who once depended on Logan's hands for their livelihood found reasons to wait, to fix things themselves, to go without. A wagon rolled past one morning without stopping, so another turned around halfway down the road. No one confronted him, no one asked questions. They simply stayed away. Logan worked anyway. He mended tools no one had brought, sharpened blades that didn't need it, kept the fire alive even when there was no work to justify the coal. It wasn't pride that drove him, it was habit, and something else he didn't yet have a name for. Winter came early that year. The wind sharpened, cutting through the gaps in the forge walls. Frost crept in overnight, clinging to the edges of the anvil, dusting the ground white before the sun could reach it. Logan counted his stores and knew they wouldn't last if things stayed the same. The woman noticed before he said a word. She didn't ask about the forge, didn't mention the empty road. Instead, one morning, she took a shovel and worked the narrow strip of earth beside the doorway. The soil was hard, stubborn, but she broke it open patiently, pressing seeds into the ground that had no business holding life. "What grows there?" Logan asked, watching from the doorway. "Things that survive," she replied. She watered them carefully, shielded them from the wind with scraps of wood, spoke to them softly in a language Logan still didn't understand. It wasn't optimism, it was preparation. At night, the cold crept deeper. Logan climbed onto the roof and patched the weakest spots, fingers numb, breath fogging the air. He replaced boards, sealed cracks, reinforced beams that had gone too long without care. Not for the forge, for them. She brought him hot water when he came down, wrapped his hands without comment. When the fire burned low, she fed it just enough to keep the warmth steady, never wasteful, never afraid of the dark. She stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go. Logan knew that now. She stayed because she had chosen this place, and the cost that came with it. One evening, as snow began to fall in earnest, Logan sat across from her near the fire. The forge was quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty. Outside, the wind howled, but inside there was only the sound of wood settling and breath moving slow and even. "You could still leave," Logan said, not looking at her. She shook her head. "I already left." He glanced up, meeting her eyes. "This," she continued, gesturing toward the walls, the fire, the narrow space they shared, "is not running." Logan nodded, something tight loosening in his chest. They did not speak of love. There was no need. Love, he was learning, was not always loud or urgent. Sometimes it was measured in small, relentless acts, staying when it was easier to go, choosing the hard ground and making it hold. Days passed, then weeks. The forge remained open, even when no one came. The plants by the door pushed stubborn green shoots through frozen soil. The roof held. The fire endured. Logan realized in the quiet hours before dawn that staying had taken more from him than leaving ever would have. It had cost him comfort, certainty, the illusion of safety, but it had given him something steadier in return. Each morning, she was there. Each night, the fire still burned. They did not promise each other anything. They didn't need to. They stayed. And in that staying, something unspoken, unbreakable, began to take root. Change didn't announce itself. It arrived the way dawn does in the high plains, slow, almost unnoticed, until suddenly the light was everywhere. Logan was the first to move, though he didn't think of it that way. One morning, a farmer from the low ridge came by with a bent hoe, the metal warped from years of hard soil. The man hesitated at the edge of the yard, cap in his hands, eyes uncertain. Logan took the tool, turned it over once, and set it on the anvil. When the work was done, he handed it back without naming a price. The farmer stared at him. "I'll pay when I can." Logan shook his head. "Use it first." Word traveled, not as a rumor this time, but as a quiet correction. A widow came next, asking if a broken latch could be fixed before the frost deepened. Then a man whose plow blade had split clean down the middle. Logan worked through them all, choosing the right steel, heating it slow, shaping it with care. Sometimes he took payment, sometimes he didn't. No ledger marked the difference. The forge fire burned longer now, not hotter but steadier, fed by purpose instead of demand. While Logan worked, the woman found her own place among the town's edges. Children drifted toward the forge out of curiosity first, then comfort. She sat with them near the door, showing them how to braid cord from scrap, how to tie knots that held under strain, how to feed a flame so it warmed instead of devoured. Fire listens, she told them, if you respect it. The children listened to her. Parents watched from a distance at first, wary but quiet. No one chased the kids away. No one spoke against it. Over time, the watching softened. A nod here, a greeting there. Small gestures, but real. The forge began to change. People lingered after their tools were fixed. They stood near the warmth, hands extended toward the fire, talking about weather, crops, the long winter ahead. Logan found himself answering questions he'd never been asked before. Not about iron, but about plans. About whether the roof would hold. About the plants growing stubbornly by the door. He answered honestly, and people stayed. One afternoon, the boy with the small horse returned. The animal's hoof was sound this time. He didn't need anything fixed. He just wanted to watch. Logan let him. The woman handed him a length of cord and showed him how to braid it tighter, cleaner than before. The boy grinned like he'd been given something rare. The town noticed. Not all at once, not loudly, but the forge was no longer avoided. It was approached. Cautiously, then with growing ease. The eyes that once held suspicion now held something closer to respect. Not because fear had vanished, but because it had been answered with consistency. Logan didn't make speeches. He didn't explain himself. He worked. He stayed. He opened the door every morning, no matter how thin the road traffic had been the day before. The woman remained at his side, never claiming the space, yet shaping it all the same. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened. Not because she demanded it, because she had never asked for anything in return. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the forge glowed gold, Logan leaned against the doorframe and watched the scene unfold. A man warmed his hands by the fire. Two children practiced knots at the edge of the yard. The woman laughed softly at something one of them said. The sound caught Logan off guard. It wasn't loud, it wasn't frequent, but it was real. He realized then that the forge had crossed a line of its own. It was no longer just a place where iron came to be reshaped. It was a place where people paused, where they gathered themselves before heading back into hard lives. The anvil still rang, the hammer still struck, but there were voices now. Breath. Movement that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with belonging. Logan didn't name it, didn't try to hold it too tightly. He simply stood there, hands blackened with soot, heart steadier than it had been in years. A place that had once known only fire and metal now held something else entirely. It held people, and somehow that made the iron stronger than it had ever been. The change didn't come with an announcement. It didn't arrive on a single day, carried by a single act. It came the way weather shifts on the plains, slow, quiet, almost unnoticed, until suddenly everything felt different. It began with a broken plow. An older farmer stood at the edge of the forge yard one morning, hat in hand, boots worn thin at the soles. He waited longer than necessary, as if expecting to be told to leave. Logan saw the way the man's eyes kept drifting toward the woman, then away again. "What do you need?" Logan asked, not unkindly. The farmer held up the plow blade. The metal was bent, cracked near the edge. "Won't cut straight anymore." Logan took it, tested the weight, ran a thumb along the split. He didn't ask how much the man could pay. He didn't ask anything at all. He set the blade on the anvil and went to work. When the blade cooled and lay straight again, Logan handed it back. The farmer stared. "I don't have—" "Use it," Logan said. "That's enough." The man nodded once, something tight easing in his face, and walked away without another word. By the end of the week, someone else came. Then another. A woman with a broken hinge on her door. A young man whose shovel had snapped clean through the handle. Logan fixed what he could, charged when he had to, waved it off when he didn't. There was no sign posted, no rule spoken aloud. People understood anyway. The forge fire burned longer hours now. Not hotter, never wasteful, but steady, patient. Logan worked with the same focus as always, but something had shifted in the way he chose his steel, the way he lingered over the details. These weren't just tools anymore. They were extensions of lives that needed to keep moving. While Logan worked, the woman found her place at the edge of the forge. Children were the first to come close. They always were, curious, unburdened by the caution their parents carried. They sat near the doorway, watching sparks lift and fade, watching iron bend beneath the hammer. She showed them how to braid rope from scrap cord, how to tie knots that didn't slip. She taught them how to feed a fire without smothering it, how to warm their hands without getting burned. Fire isn't cruel, she told them quietly. It only answers what you give it. The children listened. Parents watched from a distance at first, arms crossed, faces unreadable. No one told the children to move away. No one pulled them back. Over time, the distance shortened. A nod replaced a stare. A greeting followed the nod. One man lingered by the fire after his tools were fixed, warming his hands, talking about the coming thaw. Another brought bread one evening and left it without comment on the bench. The forge became something else. People didn't just arrive, take their iron and leave. They paused. They stood near the heat. They spoke about crops, about weather, about things that had nothing to do with metal at all. Logan found himself answering questions he'd never been asked. How long the forge had stood, how the roof had held through last winter, whether the plants by the doorway would survive the cold. He answered honestly, and people stayed a little longer. One afternoon, the boy with the small horse returned. This time, the horse was sound. The boy didn't ask for help. He just watched, eyes wide, hands busy practicing the knots the woman had shown him before. She corrected his grip gently, patient as ever. Logan caught himself watching them, the forge light catching in their faces, the air alive with more than heat. The town noticed, not with cheers or sudden warmth, but with presence, with footsteps on the road where there had once been none, with voices where silence had ruled. By evening, the forge glowed softly, shadows stretching long across the yard. Logan leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, soot dark on his hands. There were people near the fire now, children laughing quietly, adults talking low. The woman stood among them, not apart, not claiming the space, yet shaping it all the same. Logan understood then what had been happening all along. The forge had never lost its strength by opening its doors. It had gained something else. A place once defined only by fire and iron now held breath, movement, and voices that lingered. It held people. And in that presence, the forge found a purpose no hammer alone could ever shape. Spring came quietly, the way it always did out here, without ceremony, without promise. One morning, the frost loosened its grip, and by afternoon, the earth smelled dark and alive again. Snow retreated into thin, defeated patches along the fence line. The plants the woman had set by the forge door pushed new green through soil that had once felt too hard to hold anything at all. Life, it seemed, was stubborn. The message arrived on a day like that. It wasn't carried by riders this time. No horses, no dust on the road. Just a folded strip of hide left on a stone at the edge of the yard sometime before dawn. Logan found it while checking the fire pit, his movements slow, habitual. He knew what it was before he touched it. He didn't open it. He brought it to her instead. She took the hide with steady hands. Too steady. Her eyes traced the markings, the symbols cut deep and sure. When she finished, she closed her fingers around it and stood very still, as if the ground beneath her might shift. "They have spoken," she said. Logan waited. "They offer one path back," she continued, "and only one." He nodded. "And if you don't take it?" Her jaw tightened. "Then there is no return, no name spoken, no place left." The forge was quiet around them. No voices, no children nearby. Just the slow creak of wood warming in the sun, the soft hiss of coals settling. That night, she walked alone. Logan watched from the doorway as she moved beyond the yard, toward the low ridge where the land opened wide. She didn't look back. He didn't follow. He understood this wasn't a road he could walk beside her. She carried her roots with her. Blood, memory, loss. Things that could not be set down simply because a new place felt kinder. Logan stayed where he was. He repaired a hinge that didn't need fixing. He fed the fire, though the air was warm enough to do without it. He worked until the sky bruised purple and the first stars cut through the dusk. When she returned, it was after dark. She stood at the edge of the forge light, the way she had that first night in the storm. But she did not stop there this time. She stepped forward into the glow, into the place she knew by heart now. "They ask for everything," she said quietly. "Silence, obedience, forgetting." Logan leaned against the doorframe, his face unreadable. "And they ask it now," she went on, "because they see what I have found here." He said nothing. She looked at him then, searching his face. Not for permission, not for rescue. "For a reason to stay," she said. Logan shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "I won't give you that," he replied. She frowned slightly. "If you stay," he continued, "it has to be because you choose it. Not because of me. Not because this place is easier." She swallowed. "If you go," he said, his voice steady, "I won't stop you. I won't follow. But I'll be here." He gestured toward the forge, the yard, the small patch of green pushing stubbornly through the dirt. "Either way," Logan finished, "this place doesn't close its door on you." The words settled between them, simple and unadorned. Not a promise, not a plea, an anchor. She turned away again, walking to the plants by the doorway. She knelt, brushing soil from the leaves with careful fingers. The firelight caught the beads at her wrist, the same ones she had never let go of. After a long moment, she rose. "I have already lost my people," she said softly, "but I have not lost myself." She faced him fully now, shoulders squared, breath steady. "I choose to stay, not because the forge was safe, not because Logan had stood between her and violence, not because the town had softened. She stayed because she had learned the shape of her own will." Logan nodded once. Nothing else needed to be said. The night deepened around them. The forge fire burned low and steady, neither flaring nor fading. Spring had come. Years passed without ceremony. No one marked the exact moment when time softened the edges of what had once been sharp. Seasons folded into one another the way steel cools, slowly, without spectacle. The forge still stood at the end of the red dirt road, its stone walls darkened by smoke and age, and the fire still burned. But it burned differently now. The flames no longer leapt wild and hungry. They held steady, warm, and patient, answering Logan's hand the way an old friend does, without surprise, without resistance. The anvil rang when it needed to. The hammer struck true. Nothing rushed. Nothing was forced. The town had grown around the forge in its own quiet way. Children who once braided rope at the doorway were grown now, stopping by with tools of their own. Some stayed to talk, some didn't. No one questioned who belonged there anymore. The woman, older now, lines earned and honest at the corners of her eyes, moved through the space with the same quiet strength she always had. Her hair showed threads of silver when the light caught it just right. She tended the plants by the door each spring, replacing what winter claimed, never mourning the loss. She had learned long ago that survival did not require permanence. They never married. There were no vows spoken under open sky, no witnesses gathered, no rings exchanged to mark ownership or promise. They didn't need them. What they built could not be measured by ceremony. Mornings began with shared silence. Evenings ended the same way. Sometimes they spoke of the past, carefully, without pulling old wounds open. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. Both were enough. Logan remained the blacksmith. He shaped iron for those who needed it. He refused payment when he saw need outweigh pride. He charged when he knew it mattered to let a man keep his dignity. He never advertised his choices. He simply lived by them. She never returned to the tribe. Not because she forgot them. Not because the land had erased her memory. But because she understood something that took years to settle fully into her bones. Roots could live inside a person, not just beneath their feet. She carried her people with her, in the way she honored fire, in the way she taught children patience, in the way she chose restraint over rage. She did not need permission to remain who she was. On certain nights when the forge was quiet and the stars cut sharp against the sky, Logan would sit outside and listen to the land breathe. She would sit beside him, her presence a constant he had long stopped questioning. They did not speak of love. Love, he had learned, was not always a word you said out loud. Sometimes it was the choice to stay when no one was watching. Sometimes it was the refusal to claim, to bind, to own. Sometimes it was simply leaving the door open, year after year. People passing through the town sometimes asked whose place it was. Logan never answered directly. It wasn't his. It wasn't hers. It belonged to what they had made together. Two people who had once stood on the edges of belonging, one shaped by iron and solitude, the other by loss and survival, had carved out something neither of them had been given before. A home. Not one defined by walls or blood or names spoken aloud, but by shared labor, by quiet respect, by the daily decision not to walk away. The forge fire dimmed as night settled in, glowing low and steady. Logan banked the coals with practiced care. She handed him a cup of warm water, their fingers brushing briefly, familiarly. No promise passed between them. None was needed. Not every home is built of wood. Some are forged, slowly, deliberately, from fire, silence, and the choice not to leave each other behind.